why you are not broken. Finding strength in your fatigue. Right now, there is a tight, brittle clenching radiating directly through your knees, your lower back, and the deepest chambers of your lungs. A hidden ache of exhaustion that catches like grit in a gear every time you try to turn your body toward rest. You are lying awake in the late midnight stillness, consumed by the private, heavy grief of noticing how your physical frame has begun to slow down, tracking a persistent, systemic fatigue that constantly shatters your daily ambitions and leaves you feeling utterly betrayed by your own flesh. A thin, vibrating panic hums behind your eyes as you look toward a future that feels increasingly fragile, restricted, and dependent on things you cannot control, while the world outside continues to demand an endless, aggressive display of youthful velocity. You feel a profound sensation of personal failure, as if your softening physical structure were a broken machine, a compromised design that leaves you isolated and exposed to the dark. The physical space around you has settled into an unhurried, dim containment, marked by the slow, cooling tick of an old brass oil lamp on the washstand, and the thick scent of dried lavender bundles hanging from the exposed wooden ceiling beams. The air carries the faint, damp chill of a freezing early spring seeping through the stone mortar of the wall, offering a completely quiet sanctuary where the relentless speed of the outside world cannot demand your muscle or your motion. Yet, despite this stillness, your mind keeps searching the tight corners of your anatomy, trying to engineer a way out of your fatigue and rehearsing desperate treatments to force your joints back into compliance. You are holding your breath against a deep sense of limitation, treating the natural deceleration of your body as if it were a structural defect in your very soul. But what you are carrying tonight, dear friend, is not a proof of unworthiness, and you are not broken. What you are feeling is not failure, it is simply the natural, heavy mourning of a heart that has been taught to believe its only value lies in its unyielding mechanical output. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be perfectly silent, nor will we try to command your aching joints to feel miraculously whole. We are simply going to let the cold mist sit upon the clay so you can see that this physical softening is a sacred maturation, not a catastrophic break. There is a surprising, liberating paradox within ancient Buddhist wisdom that offers a dense, warm containment to this specific somatic grief. The mind naturally assumes that a human body must resemble a flawless, unyielding iron tool, a polished blade that must never lose its edge or change its temper before it can be considered useful to the world. We treat our physical decline as an embarrassing deficit that requires a constant mask of wellness to achieve validity, believing that if we lie down exhausted, our spiritual ledger is running at an absolute loss. But the deep teaching of your own unconditioned nature reveals a much deeper truth. True presence is an earth-baked clay vessel, fully capable of holding the rich essence of reality, precisely because its walls have become porous, dark, and texturized by the heat of time. Your consciousness is not a machine looking for a repair shop, it is a seasoned, unglazed teapot whose tiny, hair-fine structural lines prevent it from being rushed over a roaring flame, yet allow it to hold a far more profound fragrance than any shiny new cup. The limitation you fear is not an absence of life, it is the presence of a refined, listening sensitivity. If it feels right, take a slow, unhurried breath into the very center of your tight chest, letting the cool air expand fully into those restricted passages behind your sternum, and let it pass out into the dark room with a long, heavy sigh. You do not need to force your emotions into a state of artificial health right now. Nothing is required of you in this hour. The public squares are empty. The busy factories have turned off their engines, and you are safe enough to soften the rigid, protective posture you have been holding against the aches of your frame. Imagine your solitary life not as a failing engine, but as an old clay pot sitting completely still on a bed of cool wood ash. The frantic reaching out for physical performance and the exhausting anxiety of proving your stamina have completely stopped for the night, and the vessel is simply resting in the shadows, letting its heavy walls be cradled by the non-judgmental gravity of the earth. Maybe you have felt this too during the quiet transitions of your week, a sudden wave of displacement that tells you that because your joints are stiff, you have become an invisible spectator to the human story. We are surrounded by a restless culture that worships the athletic stride and treats the tired traveler as a broken fragment, forcing us to internalize a deep sense of shame for our unshared limitations. But look at how, even while your thoughts are spinning these dark scenarios of a fragile old age, your physical frame is being perfectly, unconditionally sustained by the platform beneath you. The physical perfection your intellect is desperately trying to chase or mourn does not exist anywhere in this room. It is merely a collection of social fabrications, a series of fragile shadows passing through the vast expanse of your awareness. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. The deep, quiet presence that witnesses your breathing does not require an unblemished spine before it agrees to hold the absolute validity of your being. In a short while, we will travel up to a damp mountain pavilion where an old herbalist understands exactly why a slow-breathing vessel is a holy monument, not an empty failure. But before we open that narrative, let yourself simply land within the wide, unformed sanctuary of this late hour. You do not need to scrub the fatigue from your blood, or pretend the vulnerability is not there before you are permitted to let your shoulders drop. Even the simple willingness to notice the brittle thud behind your knees without running away into digital distraction is a profound act of gentle, healing mindfulness. Let your jaw uncoil. Let the skin across your forehead loosen its grip, and let your hands release the imaginary weight they have been holding. You have spent so much energy trying to justify your tired place in the world. Tonight, you can let the courtyard grow completely dark, allowing your spirit to rest in the cool, self-contained center of the clay, where your true worth is safe from the changing metrics of human physical capacity. The chilly spring twilight descended like a heavy gray blanket over the terraced stone ledge, where a quiet, damp mountain pavilion overlooked the mist-filled northern valley. A middle-aged monk named Josho walked slowly across the uneven flagstones, his teeth gritting against a sharp, stubborn ache that flared deep within his left knee and lower spine with every step he took. For many years, Josho had been celebrated across the mountain monasteries for his unyielding stamina, his ability to sit in perfect, motionless lotus posture for 8 hours through the freezing winter retreats without shifting an inch. But during the past 2 seasons, a profound, heavy fatigue had settled deep into his marrow, accompanied by a stiffening of his joints that made even a short period of cross-legged sitting feel like a tearing of his muscles. Lying awake on his thin straw mat at night, he was consumed by a thin, vibrating panic, a bitter sense of internal betrayal that made him feel as though his body were a broken tool, a compromised vessel that was rapidly disqualifying him from the spiritual path. He watched the younger, unburdened novices glide effortlessly up the mountain steps with heavy bundles of firewood, their lungs clear and their limbs fluid, and a deep shame settled behind his ribs, telling him he was becoming a fragile, dependent burden whose use to the temple had completely run out. He stepped inside the pavilion floor, where the sharp, medicinal fragrance of sliced mountain ginger and drying dandelion roots hung thick in the damp air. Flat wicker trays filled with bitter herbs were stacked along the wooden railings, catching the rising humidity of the valley below. Near a small charcoal brazier sat an elderly, slow-breathing herbalist named Master Bayan, who moved with an adaptive, deliberate grace, his right hip noticeably stiffened by decades of high-altitude winters. Bayan did not use a grand stone mortar or a heavy iron pestle to prepare his mixtures. Instead, his old fingers reached down to lift a single physical object resting near a shallow inkstone. It was a cracked, hollow goosequill water dropper. Its translucent barrel stained a deep amber color from years of holding mountain spring water. Its fine tip split slightly at the edge where the fluid met the slate. Josho leaned his weight heavily against a cedar pillar, his breath coming in short, frustrated gasps that rattled against the quiet of the terrace. He looked at his swollen knee and spoke of his deep internal exhaustion, confessing how the loss of his physical endurance felt like a total bankruptcy of his monastic vows. He described the terrifying certainty that his softening structure was a failure of discipline, a personal decline that meant he was no longer strong enough to face the rigorous trials of the Dharma. He watched the old herbalist prepare a single bowl of tea with slow, unhurried precision, and asked Master Bayan how a servant of the temple could possibly find peace when his own physical frame was actively falling apart beneath his robes. Master Bayan did not offer an immediate phrase of theological comfort, nor did he instruct the young monk to ignore the sharp throbbing in his joints. Instead, he slowly dipped the split tip of the goosequill dropper into a small earthenware bowl of mountain water. A tiny, rhythmic click echoed through the damp pavilion as the hollow quill touched the clay, followed by the soft, deliberate sound of a single drop falling onto the dry calligraphy stone. Bayan held the cracked dropper perfectly steady, allowing the water to emerge not in a sudden, forceful stream, but drop by drop, each bead collecting itself at the split tip until it grew heavy enough to fall by its own weight. The action was remarkably slow, carrying an immense, unhurried density that forced Joshua's racing anxieties to slide into a sudden pause. The old herbalist looked out at the massive cedar trees swaying gently in the valley mist, and asked Joshua if the mountain spring was currently panicking, because it could not throw its entire torrent down the calligraphy stone all at once. He asked if the value of the water was lost simply because it passed through a split quill, rather than a wide iron pipe. Joshua stepped closer, his knuckles resting on the rough wooden frame of the tray. He replied that the spring remained perfectly full in the high crags, and the drop of water on the stone was exactly what was needed to soften the dry ink, requiring no violent rush to perform its true function. Master Bayan laid the amber quill back down with a soft, hollow sound, his low voice matching the deep, steady hum of the wind through the pines. He told Joshua that the foolish mind spends its early years believing it must be like an unbending iron blade, an aggressive machine that must never change its shape or lose its velocity, running its marrow to absolute dust to maintain an illusion of perfect control. We treat our physical changes like a shameful crime, a catastrophic error in our character, terrified that if our limbs slow down, our presence becomes invisible and worthless to the world. But your true consciousness is never the athletic stride or the unyielding spine. It is the seasoned, earth-baked vessel that learns how to channel the deep water drop by drop, precisely because its walls have become porous and fine. This softening you feel is not a punishment for a defective life. It is the cracking open of a deeper, more refined sensitivity that allows you to feel the true texture of reality without needing to conquer it with your muscles. The quill does not need to be whole to measure the drop. It only needs to be empty enough to let the fluid pass. Joshua stood completely motionless beside the herbal trays, his gaze fixed on the single perfect circle of wet ink spreading slowly across the gray slate stone. A profound wave of emotional recognition washed through his knees and lower spine, dissolving the hard, defensive armor that had kept his ribs tight for months. He realized that his physical limitations were not a shameful proof of failure, nor were they an environmental disaster that ruined his spiritual path. He had been exhausting his spirit, trying to maintain a rigid, machina-like pride, completely blind to the fact that his quiet, tired awareness was already an island of pure, uncompromised presence. The aching body he returned to each night was not an enemy to be beaten into submission. It was a seasoned, porous instrument that was finally ready to listen to the silence of the world. The old herbalist turned back to his small brazier, his slow, deliberate movements blending with the darkening shadows of the pavilion roof as the evening mist completely claimed the terrace steps. The mountain air grew sharper, carrying the scent of dry wood ash and toasted ginger, wrapping the old clay pavilion in a seamless, protective cloud that hid its weathered timbers from the lower plains. Let this image of the amber goosequill and the single drop of water settle into the quiet background of your own mind tonight. Notice how the tired monk did not need to instantly heal his joints or receive a magical surge of youthful energy to find a deep, physical sense of stabilization. He simply had to stop treating his physical changes as a spiritual defect. The mountain pavilion is resting in the absolute, dark quiet of the late evening, and the slow water inside the quill is perfectly still, requiring no grand performance to find its home in the clay. As you lie here in the safety of your own room, let your physical frame imitate the deep, self-contained weight of that old earthenware bowl. You do not need to fix your chronic fatigue tonight, and you do not need to guarantee a flawless, agile future before you are permitted to let your eyes grow heavy. Let the frantic, replayed questions of your physical adequacy sink down completely through the mattress, allowing your awareness to settle into the thick, non-judgmental center of your own seasoned clay, where your true worth is completely safe from the changing metrics of human physical capacity. This slow, quiet drop of water falling from the split tip of the goose quill is not telling us to stop feeling the very real, heavy sorrow of a tired body, to ignore our natural grief when our physical capacity shifts, or to look at our aching joints with a cold, mechanical detachment that denies our human vulnerability. It is not asking us to become like frozen stone statues that never feel a wave of frustration when a long-standing ambition is cut short by sudden exhaustion. It is showing us something much quieter, a deeper internal spaciousness that allows us to walk through the natural changes of our physical structure without letting the fear of limitation break our spirit. When we lie awake under the heavy pressure of the dark hours, our deepest torment rarely comes from the simple fact that our limbs are slow or our lungs are tired. The most agonizing suffering is manufactured by the way the analytical mind holds that limitation, turning a natural slowing of our physical rhythm into a permanent catastrophic verdict on our total worth as a person. We create an invisible, crushing demand that insists our bodies must function like unyielding machines forever. And then we panic when the vessel calls for a softer, more unhurried pace. Ancient insight reminds us that our somatic experience naturally contains a primary layer of difficulty, a first wound that is simply part of living in a changing, material world. It is the simple reality that muscles fatigue, that joints stiffen with the passing of seasons, and that some chapters of our lives require us to step down from a high pedestal of performance to rest in a quieter clearing. This first layer of physical reality is completely neutral, unavoidable, and carries no personal malice. It is merely the natural turning of the season as the form matures. But the second wound is the immense, burning weight we add to ourselves through our frantic psychological resistance. It is the repetitive internal commentary that claims your fatigue makes you a broken, defective failure. The constant comparing of your stamina to those who are still running at full speed, and the harsh self-criticism that treats a temporary physical restriction as a total bankruptcy of your inner life. This wisdom helps us stop adding that secondary injury to our hearts, allowing us to witness the slow deceleration of our frame without letting it freeze our capacity for peace. When we translate these deep principles into the immediate language of our modern emotional struggles, what we often call attachment is nothing more than that tight, defensive clenching that insists our physical body must remain exactly as it was in its youth, or we are completely nothing. It is a desperate craving to tie our human value to an unyielding standard of output, an assumption that if we can only force our muscles to comply, we can remain safe from the raw vulnerability of aging. We treat our physical performance as a permanent proof of relevance rather than a passing phase of our natural life. But mindfulness, when practiced with real, soft tenderness toward your own limitations, is simply the capacity to observe the terrified, racing scenarios behind your eyes without believing that every desperate thought is telling the truth. It is the ability to feel that brittle stiffness in your spine, to notice the fear of a fragile future, and to remind yourself quietly in the dark, there is a protective panic trying to run my mind tonight, but I am the deep, enduring awareness, not the mechanical machine that is slowing down. This shifting of your internal perspective brings an immense, cooling relief to our understanding of a tired body. We are conditioned by a restless, hyperproductive culture to view a physical limitation as an embarrassing deviation, a dangerous accident where we must frantically punish ourselves until we match the speed of the unburdened world. But the reality of change also means that your current fatigue is not a permanent defect, and no drop in physical velocity can ever lock you out of your true, unconditioned intelligence. Your capacity for presence, for love, and for deep resting is not a fragile resource that decreases as your joints stiffen. It is an infinite, flowing current of pure awareness that can hold the entire weight of your fatigue, your grief, and your unwritten future within its non-judgmental embrace. The broken, left-behind self that your intellect is fighting so hard to fix does not exist anywhere in reality. You are an evolving natural process, and just as the seasoned clay teapot holds its warmth perfectly, without needing to withstand the roaring flame of the forge, your existence becomes infinitely deeper when you allow your energy to move from frantic striving into the solid weight of your own quiet center. By welcoming this understanding into your quiet room, a silent, profound sense of compassion begins to dissolve the old, sharp criticisms you have been throwing at your own timeline. True compassion is not a moral checklist. It is the radical willingness to look at your own aching joints and realize that your anxiety was never a defect. You have been overthinking and panicking at night because you possess a beautiful, deep commitment to your survival and your safety, not because you are broken or fundamentally flawed. But as the old herbalist demonstrated with the amber quill, the ultimate value of the drop was never determined by the force of a rushing torrent. The essence was held entirely by the quiet clarity of a single drop meeting the dry slate, requiring no aggressive rush to perform its true function in the world. Your capacity for peace does not live in an unblemished spine. It lives in the spacious, silent background that is currently holding your breath. Slowly, the weight of this ancient teaching moves closer to the immediate surface of your mattress, blending with the deep, rhythmic movement of your lower chest in the dark shadows. You do not need to discover a perfect medical strategy or guarantee a flawless physical recovery before your body is permitted to let go of its guard tonight. The world outside your window has completely stopped its demands, letting the cold spring mist wrap the bare trees without asking for a single proof of performance from anyone. Allow yourself to drop the heavy burden of trying to outrun your own physical structure, recognizing that the very softening you have been fighting is actually a spacious, cool sanctuary, waiting for you to stop searching for an old strength and simply trust the deep, unhurried presence that is already complete within your own heart. If it feels right, let your attention begin to drop away from the heavy evaluations of your physical timeline and the constant scanning of your joints, allowing your awareness to slide gently down into the immediate, unforced geography of your body resting here in the late shadows. There is absolutely no need to adjust your spine or limbs with any sense of rigid determination. Perhaps simply notice the direct point of contact where your shoulders and lower back meet the surface beneath you, letting the long muscle groups across your shoulder blades slacken one small fraction at a time. You might take a slow, unhurried breath in through your nose, tracking the cool path of the air as it moves into the deep chambers of your lungs, and let it pass out into the dark room like a quiet mist settling over an empty terrace. There is no rule that requires you to change a single element of your physical state in this hour. Even the simple act of noticing how tightly you have been bracing against your own fatigue is an act of perfect, gentle mindfulness. You do not need to force the internal frustration to vanish through sheer willpower. You only need to sit quietly at the center of your own unforced evening. As you continue to breathe softly, let your attention travel to the small, overactive fibers right across your brow and your jaw, where the nervous energy of physical comparison has been humming all day long. You might imagine those tight areas opening up, allowing your internal gaze to soften into the dark, velvety space behind your eyes. Now let your awareness drop all the way down into your knees, your ankles, and the tips of your fingers, where your natural capacity for grounding lives. Do not try to minimize or push away the heavy restlessness that may still be vibrating inside your chest regarding your bodily changes. Instead, simply name the emotional pattern that has been driving this current of anxiety. Perhaps it is the habit of demanding a completely unblemished performance before you permit yourself to feel secure. Perhaps it is the old, tired pattern of treating your natural, a gerulated deceleration as an embarrassing defect to be corrected through shame. Just label it gently in your thoughts, recognizing it as a deeply protective mechanism that has only been trying to ensure your survival by keeping you in a state of perpetual, defensive hypervigilance. Imagine, if you will, the wide, damp mountain pavilion from the old story sitting securely right within the space of your own awareness. See the flat wicker trays of drying ginger and dandelion roots resting like silent watchers in the twilight, and find the old, earth-baked clay teapot sitting completely still near the charcoal embers. Instead of using your mind to desperately reach backward into a younger season or recreate the unyielding stamina of your past, you might simply visualize your torso as that seasoned, unglazed vessel, holding its own slow warmth perfectly without needing to withstand a roaring flame. Watch what happens in your imagination as you place your current, spinning worries about permanent fatigue, physical degradation, and a fragile future directly into the porous, dark clay of its walls. You do not need to force a sudden, dramatic breakthrough. Even letting the heavy weight of your limitation rest upon that stable instrument, without trying to cure it, is entirely enough. Let the internal image change slightly now, allowing the specific aches behind your knees, the restriction in your chest, or the silent echo of your physical grief to lose their sharp, jagged lines. They are not being erased or denied. They are simply being allowed to blend with the cool, dark reservoir of your underlying presence, turning from an urgent crisis into a slow, thick liquid that rests peacefully at the bottom of the pot. If your thoughts try to pull you back into the specific details of your limitations, or if your pulse quickens with the old urge to escape your tired frame, that is completely okay. You can return to the heavy sensation of your bedding and the slow, cooling tick of the oil lamp within your room whenever you are ready. There is no failure if your focus wanders. The seasoned clay knows exactly how to hold a restless spirit, and it does not require you to be perfectly whole before it agrees to absorb your weight. What happened next? As Josho moved toward the musk-shadowed tea hut near the dripping mountain spring, will show us an even deeper way to integrate this non-moving stabilization into your daily routine. But for now, let yourself remain right in this intermediate space where the work of production has been suspended. The dark air in your room remains steady, non-judgmental, and the heavy structure of your analytical guard is safe enough to uncoil, one small link at a time. You do not have to achieve absolute physical recovery before your eyes close for the evening. The purpose of this hour is not to force yourself to feel miraculously healed or instantly agile. The purpose is simply to help you feel less isolated inside the natural turning seasons of your own body. Let your next exhalation be as wide and hollow as the mountain valley, holding nothing but the simple, unhurried movement of the night as it settles over the roof. The damp indigo darkness settled completely over the low-ceilinged, moss-shadowed tea hut built directly over a slow-dripping mountain spring. Josho stepped across the slick threshold stone, his breath coming in a tight, protective rattle as he carefully lowered his weight onto a low cedar bench. The quiet realization he had touched in the pavilion had been entirely shattered by the grueling afternoon duties he had been assigned to clean the stone corridors before the evening chanting, and the repetitive bending had ignited a fierce, burning ache through his lower back that made his entire left leg feel unmoored and weak. To compound his internal friction, a visiting monk from the southern provinces had openly commented on his slow, limping gait, asking with an air of casual pity if the great champion of the winter marathons had finally broken his stride. The sting of that comment had triggered an elevated defensive hypervigilance behind Josho's ears, a hot wave of humiliation that forced his intellect into a frantic, replayed trial. His mind kept insisting that a body that could not handle a simple broom was an absolute failure, a useless shell that would eventually leave him abandoned in a corner of the infirmary while the rest of the community moved forward without him. Inside the dim, earth-walled room, the air was saturated with the rich, comforting fragrance of toasted green tea leaves, damp oak moss, and slow, steady hiss of boiling mountain water rising from a small clay brazier. Near the center of the tatami floor sat an old temple tea master named Miyako, who had lived by the dripping spring for 40 winters. Miyako had completely lost the use of her left arm decades ago during a harsh mountain winter, her sleeve tucked neatly into her sash. Yet she moved among the bamboo whisks and ceramic jars with an unhurried, single-handed precision that made each gesture look like a stroke of ink on silk. She was currently preparing a small hand-carved block of soft palovnia wood, pressing it gently into the iron hinge of the heavy wooden gate that shielded the spring water from the mountain wind, reducing the harsh, metallic scrape of the iron to a low, rhythmic thud. Josho watched her, his hands clenched into tight knots against his robes, his shoulders drawn up toward his ears in a desperate effort to hide the tremor of exhaustion vibrating through his spine. He looked at the old woman's single working hand and spoke of his deep, internal defeat, admitting that the simple judgment of the southern monk had stripped him of all his meditative composure. He confessed that every twinge in his joints felt like a public accusation of his unworthiness, a terrifying reminder that his capacity to hold the space of the temple was shrinking with every setting sun. He looked at the tiny, unglazed purple clay teapot she was using and asked how an old microporous vessel could possibly bear the pressure of the boiling spring, when its base was covered in hair-fine structural lines that threatened to split wide open under the fire. Miyako did not set down her Polovnia woodblock, nor did she offer a lecture on the nature of pride. Instead, she gently slid the old purple clay teapot closer to the edge of the hearth. She directed Josho's attention to the very bottom of the unglazed earthenware, where decades of heat had created an intricate web of fine, dark lines across the porous surface. In a low, steady voice that matched the slow dripping of the mountain spring behind the wall, she explained that when this pot was first taken from the kiln, its clay was loud, bright, and completely non-porous, unable to absorb the essence of the leaf or protect the water from the cold mountain draft. It was only after years of being exposed to the boiling current, after its structural lines had softened and opened to the heat, that the clay developed the capacity to retain the rich, deep fragrance of 1,000 previous brewings. She poured a stream of the simmering spring water into the dark opening, letting the steam wrap Josho's face in a warm, bitter cloud. She told him that his deepest torment was not coming from the stiffness in his spine or the casual words of the visiting monk, but from his absolute, exhausting habit of treating every fearful prediction in his head as an undeniable command to go to war with his own flesh. She observed that he was treating his body's natural, mature deceleration as an enemy invasion rather than the sacred, porous ripening of a seasoned vessel. She explained that to find the true center of the path, a man must learn the single, small discipline of breathing completely through the uncertainty of his physical frame, sitting within his current limitations without trying to force the clay back into an unyielding iron tool. Josho sat perfectly still on the cedar bench, the pungent aroma of the toasted leaves filling his lungs as he watched the dark moisture slowly seep through the microporous walls of the teapot, radiating a deep, slow-cooled warmth into the dim room. In that quiet interval, between the dripping of the spring and the hiss of the brazier, a subtle, profound transformation took root across his lower back and knees. He did not experience a miraculous healing of his stiffened joints, and his systemic fatigue did not magically vanish from his blood. Instead, he made one small, disciplined shift. He stopped fighting the reality of his current container. He took a long, unhurried breath into the very center of his physical ache, let his shoulders drop away from his ears, and chose to sit entirely still with the raw, unpolished truth of his limited energy. He stopped defending his historical pride against the monk's comment, stopped trying to project an illusion of perfect health, and permitted his physical frame to absorb the weight of his years without turning that change into a personal failure. The old tea master lifted the pot with a single, fluid sweep of her hand, pouring the amber liquid into a plain, unpolished bowl as the midnight darkness completely claimed the mountain hut, wrapping the low eaves in a dense, protective silence that softened the sharp contours of the valley. Let this image of the unglazed purple clay teapot and the soft paulownia block settle into the deep, quiet spaces of your own consciousness tonight. Notice how the tired monk did not need to run a marathon or receive an external guarantee of absolute physical restoration to feel an immense sense of physical stabilization. He simply had to stop treating his body's natural changes as a spiritual catastrophe. The tea hut is resting in the absolute quiet of the late hour, and the old clay vessel is sitting perfectly still on its bed of wood ash, requiring no immediate speed to hold the full essence of its life. As you lie here in the safety of your own space, let your physical body imitate the dense, porous weight of that seasoned stoneware pot. You do not need to resolve your chronic fatigue tonight, and you do not need to guarantee an agile, unblemished future before your eyelids are permitted to grow heavy. Let the frantic, Replayed strategies of your mind sink down completely through the mattress, allowing your awareness to settle into the wide, unvarnished empty space of your own presence, where your true worth is completely safe from the changing structures of the material world. When we dissect the heavy, cold hypervigilance that locks itself across your joints during these midnight hours, we can begin to expose the hidden psychological engine that converts a natural, physical deceleration into a desperate crisis of personal survival. The sharp sting of structural stiffness or the dull ache of a systemic fatigue is not an indicator from the cosmos telling you that your body is a ruined, worthless shell. It is the raw consequence of an analytical ego that has spent its entire life using muscular output and relentless physical stamina as its primary weapon to secure validation from a hyper-competitive world, to protect ourselves from the terrifying possibility of being deemed fragile, slow, or dependent. The mind constructs an internal tribunal that never sleeps, tirelessly rehearsing an impoverished future of total physical helplessness and replaying every clumsy, exhausted moment of your recent weeks. We lie completely motionless under our sheets, checking our breathing and using intense self-judgment as a manipulative whip to force our tired organs back into a state of hyper-accelerated performance, mistakenly assuming that if we can only punish ourselves with enough shame, we can somehow fix our changing biology. Over time, this constant somatic resistance hardens into a toxic identity until we stop seeing our fatigue as a temporary resting season and begin to define our actual soul as a broken, shattered vessel that has been permanently disqualified from the human story. This deep habit of turning a natural physical ripening into an absolute measure of your spiritual value is precisely what ancient Buddhist wisdom seeks to illuminate and dismantle through the practice of non-defensive soft observation. The teaching invites us to look directly into our fear of bodily decline and separate the clean, immediate reality of our physical container from the elaborate mental architecture we build on top of our pain. There is an inescapable primary layer of human existence, the first pain, which is simply what life naturally brings to our door as we travel through a changing material universe. It is the simple fact that skin softens, that bones grow heavy, and that some chapters of our journey require us to step down from a frantic stage of production to rest on a bed of quiet wood ash. This first layer of circumstantial weather is completely neutral, unavoidable, and carries no personal malice. It is merely the natural settling of the mountain humidity after a long winter of growth. But the secondary layer, the second pain, is the infinite, exhausting web of commentary that your intellect adds to the darkness. It is the terrifying story that claims your physical limitations make you an invisible, left-behind failure. The constant scanning of your anatomy for proof of your decline, and the profound resistance that treats a temporary restriction of movement as a total destruction of your safety. We cannot always control the first pain through sheer force of willpower, nor can we command our tired joints to magically smooth out their contours just because we fear the judgment of a faster world. But we can absolutely learn to stop feeding the secondary fire of our own anxious commentary. We can notice the creeping sensation of physical grief behind our eyes and choose to witness its presence without turning it into an executioner's blade that determines our right to occupy space on this earth. True peace, within this seasoned perspective, is never defined as the total absence of physical difficulty, nor is it a magical guarantee that you will never feel the heavy weight of chronic fatigue again. Peace is an entirely different, non-defensive relationship with that difficulty. It is the willingness to look at your limited capacity and recognize that your value does not depend on your ability to outrun an unburdened apprentice or maintain a rigid, unyielding spine for the world to see. Your ultimate safety lives in the wide, self-contained capacity of your own awareness, which holds the silence of the midnight hour with the exact same unconditional grace that it once held the most fluid movements of your youth. When you bring this simple, stabilizing clarity to the braced areas beneath your spine, the very texture of your physical container begins to shift its weight. You see that you do not need to solve the riddle of your somatic destiny or cure your natural fatigue before you are permitted to let your eyes grow heavy tonight. The desperate habit of using shame to fix your biology only tightens the internal knots, making your muscles feel like brittle pieces of unaligned timber. By realizing that your true nature was never the athletic stride, the physical output, or the specific cellular perfection you maintained in your 20s, the terrifying stakes of your bodily changes begin to dissolve into the shadows of the room. You are not a fragile wreck that is about to shatter because it rests on a low bench. You are the seasoned purple clay vessel that has found its own unyielding alignment, perfectly dark, perfectly porous, and perfectly secure regardless of whether the frame is swift or slow. The quietness descending upon your inner world is not a deficit to be hidden away. It is the natural, dignified arrival of your seasoned depth, a rich reservoir of accumulated truth that requires no immediate performance to maintain its permanent place in the cosmos. Slowly, this quiet integration allows the heavy wheels of your analytical mind to drift into a soft, effortless glide. The phantom futures of an isolated, dependent old age and public worthlessness that were keeping your pulse fast lose their sharp, geometric edges, melting away like the dark mountain mist dropping into the quiet spring behind the tea hut wall. You do not have to carry the heavy ledgers of your physical competition into your dreams tonight. The realization that you are the silent space witnessing the turning of your somatic seasons rather than the broken, incomplete object trapped inside them brings a profound physical reassurance to your entire frame. Let the muscles along your jaw and your lungs uncoil completely, letting the back of your skull settle deep into the center of your bedding as you surrender the daily chore of steering your own survival. The room around you requires no frantic display before it agrees to shelter you, and the deep night is entirely satisfied to wrap your body in a dark, unmapped sanctuary where there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to fix, and nothing left to fear. This steady, silent collection of our energy inside the microporous walls of the vessel is not intended to remain confined to a remote mountain tea hut. It is a vital, practical anchor designed to be brought directly into the fragmented, hyper-accelerated landscape of your modern daily existence. We encounter our modern volatile storms not on the paths of mossy springs, but in the small, frantic habits that repeat themselves throughout our waking hours. We feel it when we are lying awake at night, our fingers twitching as we repeatedly lift a digital screen to check for an update, a notification, or a sudden signals of social reassurance that might offer a temporary burst of comfort, treating a silent application as a terrifying confirmation that we are falling behind in life and that our physical vitality is completely dissolving. We experience it when our thoughts keep replaying an old structural mistake or an awkward encounter from our past, or when we look at the carefully curated milestones of peers who still possess boundless stamina and find ourselves trapped in a cold spiral of comparison, convincing ourselves that everyone else has secured their future while we remain dangerously exposed in the dark. We spend so much of our public routine pretending to be perfectly fine, plastering a polite, easy smile across our face while carrying an immense heavy weight right behind our throat. We try to manipulate the trajectory of our close relationships, our daily projects, or our physical stamina through constant, exhausting overanalysis. Yet when our physical frame finally collapses from the sheer weight of this mental architecture, we find ourselves unable to sink into sleep because an invisible inner critic insists that wanting rest without earning a perfect recovery is an act of guilt. But true peace is never achieved by finally discovering a flawless biological formula or an instant agility that eliminates all human limitation. Peace is practiced in the tiny, unnoticed gaps of a chaotic afternoon. It is the willingness to pause for a single, unhurried moment before you check your phone for reassurance, recognizing that this brief suspension of action is a profound form of living wisdom, a deliberate breath taken before you answer an intimidating query or step into a crowded workspace is a direct realization that not every frantic thought spinning through your mind deserves your immediate obedience, and not every rapid spike of physical grief is an absolute command to pull your life apart. You can care deeply about your health, your career, and the well-being of those around you without gripping the concept of control so tightly that your forearms turn to iron and your lower back turns to stone. You can live with an unresolved transition, with a slower physical recovery, or with a temporary boundary of exhaustion, without letting that space ruin the simple, neutral reality of the room you are currently inhabiting. Just as the old teapot held its protective layer of dark clay without needing to rush its fire, you are fully permitted to drop the heavy ledgers of your physical competition right now. Simply because your body is tired, and because your existence does not require you to find immediate validation before it agrees to grant you rest. When you bring this seasoned grounding into your modern domestic triggers, the nature of your waiting changes its form. The slow period in your physical stamina, the lack of immediate fluency in your daily tasks, or the natural friction of managing an aging body is no longer an emergency that proves your worthlessness. It is simply a moment where the foundation has become perfectly level beneath the stone, letting the old, leaning habits drop naturally away so that the substance of your true awareness can show its face. By refusing to spin 5 different hypothetical disasters out of a quiet evening, you allow the present moment to remain exactly what it is, a soft, spacious gap that does not require you to write a tragic conclusion for it before the sun rises. You stop treating your natural somatic changes as a defect to be corrected through shame, and you let them become a protective sanctuary where your active intellect can finally drop its sharpest tools. As you lie here in the deep, amber shadow of the late evening, let this poetic loosening move through the specific modern worries that were keeping your pulse fast an hour ago. The digital devices can remain dark, the indicators of external approval can remain silent, and the frantic pace of the market can be left to run its race without your participation. You do not have to achieve a brilliant matching physical breakthrough before your eyelids are allowed to grow heavy. The entire physical world has turned away from the blinding friction of the sun, letting the cool evening air fall upon the damp earth without asking permission from anyone, and you are entirely safe to follow its rhythm. Let your shoulders drop a fraction of an inch deeper into the bedding, letting the small muscles across your temples relax, and allow your frame to settle into the supportive depth of the mattress, trusting that the unmoving sediment of your own accumulated truth already knows exactly how to hold you without you needing to guide it. The public squares and the hyper-accelerated digital channels have completely surrendered their noise to the dark, leaving only the vast, cool evening to shelter the unmapped corners of your room. The internal courtrooms have finally dropped their charges. The soft paulownia wood has been packed tightly into the heavy iron hinges of your world, and the frantic calculations of the daytime hours are no longer being tracked by your tired eyes. Let the speed of your internal monologue slow down to a soft whisper, matching the heavy, silent settling of the moss-shadowed tea hut as the slow mountain spring drips behind the wall in an unmoving cloud. Your physical body is becoming profoundly heavy, sinking down into the center of the mattress like that sturdy earthenware bowl, resting on a bed of cool wood ash, untouched by the wind and completely free from the obligation to perform. With every unhurried breath you let go, your lower back feels increasingly spacious, increasingly empty, completely untangled from the frantic geometry of somatic perfection. You have full permission to stop solving your whole life tonight. The shifting physical metrics, the unfinished daily tasks, and the intimidating timelines you have been replaying do not need to be sorted, fixed, or conquered before your spirit is allowed to rest. Let the phantoms of your old physical stamina dissolve into the shadows, letting the multiple predictions of physical helplessness lose their terrifying sharpness as the cool air enters and leaves your center. You are no longer required to build an unyielding monument across the changing landscape of your body, and you do not need to prove your velocity to a single competitor before your eyes can close. The unglazed space you have been fighting was never a dangerous decline. It is simply the natural, quiet incubation of a seasoned vessel, and tonight your hands can rest completely empty upon the sheets, leaving your mind entirely unburdened by tomorrow. Listen to the absolute stillness that remains when the urge to maintain an unbroken line of output finally goes to sleep. The environment around you is perfectly secure, and your breathing has become so quiet, so deep, that it barely ripples the dark atmosphere across your lower chest. The teaching is settling into the very core of your heart now, not as a complex theory to memorize, but as a physical feeling of returning home to a baseline of safety that never needed an unblemished spine to find its validity. You are the silent tea hut at midnight, where the old purple clay teapot rests perfectly still on its bed of cool wood ash, its porous walls moving secrets in the dark without needing to produce an immediate leaf. There are no separate timelines to balance here, no physical restrictions to calculate, and no old identities to defend against the wind. Let yourself sink completely into the dark support of this deep sleep, giving up the final, stubborn pieces of the tools you have carried all day. The mountain valley is vast enough to hold everything you left unpolished, and the earth does not require your container to be flawless before agreeing to sustain your weight. Every muscle along your brow, your jaw, and your lungs has gone completely slack, soft and open, like the raw clay of the pot absorbing the cool dampness of the spring house floor. The dilemmas you spent all day trying to fix have lost their urgency, dissolving into nameless, quiet shadows that float harmlessly through the background of your consciousness. You are returning to the primordial, untroubled presence that has always been your true ground, long before you ever learned how to worry about your limited strength. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful, velvety expanse, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. When the unglazed clay is finally permitted to cool on the ash, who is the one that remains awake to feel the lingering warmth of the water? The lingering warmth does not require a flawless iron shell to preserve its essence, nor does it look back with regret at the roaring fires of the kiln that first baked its clay into a separate form. It is the unnameable, quiet presence that abides within the very center of your softening structure, entirely content to let the active world run its frantic races, while it holds the simple, unvarnished truth of your immediate life. When we look deeply into the fine, hair-fine structural lines tracking across the base of the pot, we begin to recognize that our fear of physical limitation is merely a construct of an anxious intellect that has forgotten the natural rhythm of the earth. The mind creates an artificial measurement, a crushing standard that insists your value decreases if your limbs cannot match the fluid velocity of a younger peer, or if your lungs demand a more deliberate, unhurried breath. But the ancient wisdom of your own awareness reveals that you are not a corporate machine designed for endless expansion. You are a seasoned vessel, and your structural changes are the very openings through which a deeper, more refined spiritual fragrance can finally be shared with the world. When we observe the natural landscape, we see that it never uses shame to force its components into a state of permanent perfection. The mountain spring behind the wall does not freeze its current, because it can only emerge drop by drop through a split quill, and the old Paulonia wood block does not apologize for its softness as it dampens the heavy iron strike of the temple gate. They yield to the immediate reality of their containers, allowing the friction of time to smooth away their sharpest, most defensive edges until they become porous channels for a peace that passes straight through the world's judgment. By surrendering the heavy carriage of your spine to the mattress tonight, you are stepping back into this wide, non-resistant cosmic alignment, realizing that you do not need to maintain a flawless mask of health to be a whole and beautiful piece of the universe. Your capacity for stillness is an intrinsic quality of your consciousness, a quiet flame that remains completely unblemished whether your physical frame is climbing the highest peaks or resting entirely empty in the dark. Let the final, replayed strategies behind your eyes dissolve completely into the cool, velvety shadows that wrap themselves around your bed like an ancient moss. The phantom voices of public assessment, the frantic comparison of your energy levels on a digital stream, the replayed conversations of your working hours, and the thin panic of what your biology will bring tomorrow are all losing their geometric grip on your attention, melting away like the dark wood ash settling under the dying charcoal. You do not have to map out a single recovery plan or justify a single boundary before your body is fully permitted to drop into the deep currents of rest. The active marketplace has closed its gates, the world has suspended its demands, and the night is entirely satisfied to hold your tired frame within an unconditional, protective embrace. that requires no proof of your productivity to grant you sanctuary. You are safe to let go of the oars completely. As your breathing becomes smaller, quieter, and deeply unhurried, feel the immense physical peace that arrives when you completely stop fighting the natural turning of your seasons. Every muscle across your forehead, your jaw, and your lungs has gone completely slack, soft and open like the unglazed purple clay absorbing the damp, cool humidity of the spring house floor. The heavy iron cargo weight has been laid down for good. The unpolished block has found its perfect alignment on the granite base, and your mind has become a wide, unruffled valley that holds nothing but the simple, silent movement of the late hour as it settles over your roof. There are no separate physical flaws left to salvage, no separate mistakes left to replay, and no separate versions of yourself left to fix or defend. You are safely home, resting within the primordial, untroubled presence that has always been your true ground, long before you ever learned how to worry about your limited strength. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful velvety expanse, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The lingering warmth does not ask to be captured by a perfect external ledger, nor does it look back with regret at the roaring fires of the kiln that first baked its clay into a separate form. It is the unnameable, quiet presence that abides within the very center of your softening structure, entirely content to let the active world run its frantic races, while it holds the simple, unvarnished truth of your immediate life. When we look deeply into the fine, hair-fine structural lines tracking across the base of the pot, we begin to recognize that our fear of physical limitation is merely a construct of an anxious intellect that has forgotten the natural rhythm of the earth. The mind creates an artificial measurement, a crushing standard that insists your value decreases if your limbs cannot match the fluid velocity of a younger peer, or if your lungs demand a more deliberate, unhurried breath. But the ancient wisdom of your own awareness reveals that you are not a corporate machine designed for endless expansion. You are a seasoned vessel, and your structural changes are the very openings through which a deeper, more refined spiritual fragrance can finally be shared with the world. When we observe the natural landscape, we see that it never uses shame to force its components into a state of permanent perfection. The mountain spring behind the wall does not freeze its current, because it can only emerge drop by drop through a split quill. And the old Polonia woodblock does not apologize for its softness, as it dampens the heavy iron strike of the temple gate. They yield to the immediate reality of their containers, allowing the friction of time to smooth away their sharpest, most defensive edges until they become porous channels for a peace that passes straight through the world's judgment. By surrendering the heavy carriage of your spine to the mattress tonight, you are stepping back into this wide, non-resistant cosmic alignment, realizing that you do not need to maintain a flawless mask of health to be a whole and beautiful piece of the universe. Your capacity for stillness is an intrinsic quality of your consciousness, a quiet flame that remains completely unblemished whether your physical frame is climbing the highest peaks or resting entirely empty in the dark. Let the final, replayed strategies behind your eyes dissolve completely into the cool, velvety shadows that wrap themselves around your bed like an ancient moss, the phantom voices of public assessment, the frantic comparison of your energy levels on a digital stream, the replayed conversations of your working hours, and the thin panic of what your biology will bring tomorrow are all losing their geometric grip on your attention, melting away like the dark wood ash settling under the dying charcoal. You do not have to map out a single recovery plan or justify a single boundary before your body is fully permitted to drop into the deep currents of rest. The active marketplace has closed its gates, the world has suspended its demands, and the night is entirely satisfied to hold your tired frame within an unconditional, protective embrace that requires no proof of your productivity to grant you sanctuary. You are safe to let go of the oars completely. As your breathing becomes smaller, quieter, and deeply unhurried, feel the immense physical peace that arrives when you completely stop fighting the natural turning of your seasons. Every muscle across your forehead, your jaw, and your lungs has gone completely slack, soft and open, like the unglazed purple clay absorbing the damp, cool humidity of the springhouse floor. The heavy iron cargo weight has been laid down for good. The unpolished block has found its perfect alignment on the granite base, and your mind has become a wide, unruffled valley that holds nothing but the simple, silent movement of the late hour as it settles over your roof. There are no separate physical flaws left to salvage, no separate mistakes left to replay, and no separate versions of yourself left to fix or defend. You are safely home, resting within the primordial, untroubled presence that has always been your true ground, long before you ever learned how to worry about your limited strength. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful velvety expanse, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep.